In the farthest corner of the Andromeda expanse, where stars shimmered like scattered diamonds across a velvet sky, there stood the magnificent celestial spire, a royal palace carved from moonstone and starlight, suspended above the planet Nithra by ancient anti-gravity crystals humming with energy older than time itself. The spire rose in spiraling elegance, its towers piercing the clouds like silver spears, each level glowing with soft azure light that pulsed gently, as if breathing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the galaxy. It was here, amidst gardens of floating orchids and fountains that poured liquid light instead of water, that Zoran Vex, Earth's most sarcastic interstellar diplomat, found himself utterly, hilariously, terrifyingly trapped. He hadn't meant to stay. In fact, he'd only come for a goodwill tour, a 5-minute speech about peace between Earth and the Nithran Dominion, followed by a quick bite of whatever alien delicacy they served that didn't look like it was still blinking. But then, during a banquet under twin moons, someone asked him why he wasn't married. Zoran, wearing a slightly too tight ceremonial suit that made his shoulders look like overstuffed pillows, had raised his glass with a grin and said, "Because I've got standards higher than this palace, and apparently, the universe hasn't produced anyone willing to put up with my snoring yet." The room erupted in laughter, except at the high table, where Queen Seraphine of Nithra sat flanked by her twin daughters, Princess Lyra and Princess Mira. The sisters, both towering and regal in flowing gowns of iridescent silk that shifted color with their moods, froze mid-sip. Their skin, a deep ocean blue that shimmered under the ambient glow, seemed to darken slightly, and their long, snow-white hair floated around them as though underwater, defying gravity with quiet elegance. They exchanged a glance so intense it could have cracked diamond. Then, without a word, they stood in perfect unison, their violet eyes locking onto Zoran like twin targeting lasers. Before he could finish chewing a suspiciously gelatinous canopy, 2 royal guards, massive, 6-fingered warriors clad in armor that looked like solidified lightning, appeared at his sides. "You are invited to extend your stay," one rumbled, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. Zoran blinked. "Invited? Like, voluntarily?" The guard tilted his helmeted head. "The princesses do not invite. They decree." And just like that, Zoran's diplomatic visit became indefinite detention disguised as luxury. He was escorted through corridors lined with murals depicting ancient Nithran legends. Gods riding comets, queens commanding storms with a whisper, warriors dancing through asteroid fields, and shown to a suite so opulent it made Earth's fanciest hotel look like a collapsed cardboard box. His bedroom had a ceiling that projected the night sky of any planet he desired, a bed so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud that had once been hugged by angels, and a bathroom with a bath that filled itself with warm stardust-infused water whenever he sighed too loudly. There were servants too, silent, blue-skinned attendants with white hair tied in intricate knots, who moved like shadows, appearing only when needed and vanishing just as quickly. One brought him tea that tasted like cinnamon and nostalgia. Another folded his clothes with such precision it looked like origami performed by robots with PhDs. But none of that mattered, because every morning, without fail, Lyra and Mira would appear at his door, radiant and relentless. They never came separately, always together, always synchronized. One day, they arrived carrying scrolls written in glowing glyphs, declaring Zoran a candidate in the ancient rite of cosmic union, a sacred tradition where a foreigner of exceptional spirit is chosen to undergo trials to prove worthiness as a consort to the royal twin line. "It has been 3,000 years since the rite was invoked," Lyra announced, her voice melodic but firm, like wind chimes in a storm, "and never before has it been triggered by a joke." Zoran nearly choked on his breakfast pastry. Wait. You're telling me I got roped into some ancient alien marriage ritual? Because I made a joke about being single?" Mira nodded solemnly, though the faintest twitch at the corner of her lips betrayed amusement. "Humor is a sacred signal among our people. When a soul speaks truth wrapped in jest, the universe listens. The palace felt your words. The stars responded. The rite awakened." She gestured to the ceiling, where constellations briefly rearranged themselves into what looked suspiciously like a winking face. Zoran stared. "So you're saying the building has a sense of humor?" "It has a soul," Lyra corrected. "And it chose you." From that moment, Zoran's life became a whirlwind of absurdity, danger, and unexpected warmth. The first trial was the labyrinth of echoing hearts, a shifting maze beneath the palace where walls moved like living things, and every turn forced him to confront memories he'd rather forget. He saw himself at 16, awkwardly trying to ask out a girl named Jenny at a school dance, tripping over his own feet and knocking over the punch bowl. He saw himself at 25, sitting alone in a tiny apartment eating cold pizza while watching a rom-com he pretended not to care about. The maze whispered his insecurities. No one stays. You're too much. Not enough. Always the funny one, never the one they love. But then, just as despair threatened to swallow him, a soft hum filled the air. Through the mist, the silhouettes of Lyra and Mira appeared, holding hands, their presence like twin suns cutting through fog. You are not alone, Lyra said. Even jesters have hearts worth guarding. Mira added, and yours beats louder than most. With their guidance, or perhaps their interference, since Zoran swore the walls parted too easily after that. He emerged victorious, clutching a glowing crystal heart that pulsed in time with his own. The second trial was the Sky Arena, where champions from across the galaxy gathered to compete in aerial combat using gravity-defying gliders shaped like dragons. Zoran, who had never flown anything besides a commercial airliner, and even then usually asleep, was handed a sleek, silver glider that purred when touched. Just think where you want to go, a technician explained. It reads your intent. Zoran thought, I want to survive, and the machine shot forward like a bullet. For hours, he tumbled through the skies, dodging energy blasts, getting tangled in zero-gravity ribbons meant to slow competitors, and accidentally launching himself into a flock of singing space pelicans that screeched in annoyance. At one point, he collided with a rival pilot, a hulking warrior from the Obsidian Belt with 4 arms and a temper shorter than his wingspan. They spun in a deadly spiral, locked in combat, until Zoran did the only thing he could think of. He told a joke, midair, over the universal comms. Hey, if we keep this up, we're gonna need a couples therapist. The arena fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, the warrior burst into booming laughter, released his grip, and saluted before flying off. The crowd roared. Even the judges, ancient beings with faces like cracked porcelain, chuckled behind their masks. Lyra and Mira watched from a royal balcony, one hand clasped tightly, the other wiping away what might have been a tear or a sparkle of pride. But not everyone celebrated Zoran's rise. High Lord Dravik, the Chancellor of the Nithran Council and a man whose ego was only matched by the size of his forehead, despised the idea of a human, especially a joking human, being considered for royal union. This is an insult to our bloodline, he thundered during a council meeting, slamming a fist on the obsidian table. The right was meant for warriors, scholars, demigods. Not some earthling who thinks sarcasm is a survival skill. His followers murmured in agreement. Whispers spread through the palace like poison. Rumors claimed Zoran was a spy, that he'd hacked the palace's emotional core, that he'd charmed the princesses with forbidden earth magic, otherwise known as compliments, and listening when they spoke. Dravik began plotting. First, he sabotaged the next trial, the pool of infinite reflections, by tampering with the sacred waters so they showed only Zoran's darkest fears. Failure, loneliness, the crushing weight of never belonging anywhere. Then he sent assassins. They came at night, cloaked in darkness that drank the light, slipping through the palace corridors like smoke. Zoran woke to the hum of a plasma blade igniting beside his bed. He rolled just in time, the mattress vaporizing into a puff of glowing ash. He scrambled backward, grabbing the nearest object, a ceremonial lamp shaped like a coiled serpent. As the assassin lunged, Zoran swung wildly. The lamp connected with a clang, sending the attacker stumbling. Look, Zoran panted. I don't know what kind of review I left on your mom's Yelp page, but this seems excessive. The assassin hesitated just a fraction, confused by the lack of fear, by the absurdity of the situation. That pause was all it took. A blur of blue and white flashed through the doorway. Lyra struck first, disarming the assassin with a whip made of solidified sound. Mira followed, freezing the intruder in a cage of crystallized air. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their movements were poetry in motion, born of centuries of training and an unbreakable bond. Afterward, as the guards hauled the captive away, Lyra turned to Zoran, concern etched into her flawless features. You could have died. He shrugged, brushing ash from his pajamas. I've survived worse. Like my aunt's meatloaf. That stuff was sentient. Mira smiled despite herself. You do not fear death. Nah, Zoran said, grinning. I fear boring conversations and expired yogurt. Death's just part of the package. Lyra stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You amuse us, but more than that, you see us. Not as princesses, Not as power. As people. Zoran's smile softened. Well, you are kinda hard to miss. I mean, blue skin, white hair. Move like you're in a slow-motion perfume ad. How could I not notice? Their connection deepened after that night. During quiet moments, they walked the starlit gardens, where flowers bloomed in colors unknown to Earth, releasing fragrances that evoked forgotten memories. Zoran told them about Earth, about rainstorms and pizza, about bad karaoke and childhood pets. They listened with rapt fascination, as though he were describing magic. In return, they shared Nithran myths, songs sung in harmonic dual voices that made the air vibrate, and secrets of the cosmos hidden in constellation patterns. He learned that Lyra was the thinker, calm and strategic, her mind always calculating 10 steps ahead. Mira was the feeler, passionate and intuitive, guided by emotion and instinct. Together, they were balance, harmony, power, and somehow, against all odds, they had chosen him, a sarcastic, slightly overweight human from a backwater planet with Wi-Fi problems. But Dravik wasn't finished. He convinced a faction of traditionalist nobles that the right had been corrupted, that the palace's response to Zoran's joke was a malfunction, not divine will. He called for a grand tribunal, a rare event where the entire royal court would gather to decide whether the right should continue. If Zoran failed to prove his worth, he would be exiled, and the princesses would be forbidden from pursuing the union. The night before the tribunal, Zoran sat on his balcony, staring at the twin moons hanging low in the indigo sky. Doubt gnawed at him. Who was he to stand before gods and kings? What did he have to offer a civilization that built palaces in the sky and spoke to stars? The doors slid open silently. Lyra and Mira entered, dressed not in royal attire, but in simple robes of silver thread, their hair loose, their expressions unguarded. They sat beside him, one on each side, their presence like warmth in winter. "You do not need to win tomorrow," Mira said softly. "Not for us." Lyra added, "We have already chosen. Our hearts do not follow rules. They follow truth." Zoran looked at them, really looked, past the beauty, past the royalty, into the souls beneath. "I don't belong here," he admitted. "I'm not brave. I'm not strong. I make jokes because it's easier than saying I'm scared." Mira reached for his hand. "That is why you are brave. You face fear with laughter." Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder. "And strength isn't in muscles. It's in enduring, in caring, even when it hurts." The next day, the Grand Tribunal was held in the Hall of Eternal Echoes, a vast chamber where the floor was a pool of liquid mercury reflecting the sky above. Nobles from 100 worlds filled the tiers, their ornate garments shimmering, their whispers buzzing like insects. Dravik stood at the center, draped in black robes lined with red firestone, his voice booming through the hall as he listed Zoran's crimes. Ignorance of Nithran law, lack of noble blood, excessive use of irony. "He is unworthy," Dravik declared. "A jester in a world of kings." Then it was Zoran's turn. He stood, not tall, not imposing, just a man in a slightly wrinkled shirt. The entire hall waited for him to falter, to beg, to fail. Instead, he smiled. "So, funny story. I came here thinking I'd give a speech, eat some weird food, and catch the next shuttle home. I joked about being single because, well, it's true. I've never found anyone who really got me, who laughed at my dumb jokes and didn't roll their eyes when I cried during dog commercials." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. He continued, "Then these two, Lyra and Mira, showed up, and suddenly the universe went, 'Oh, this guy? Yeah, he's the one.' And I'm standing here thinking, why? What did I do to deserve that kind of attention from two incredible women who could have anyone they want?" He paused, looking at the sisters. "But then I realized, maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about showing up, about being real, even when you're scared, even when you're not sure. I may not be a warrior or a poet or a god, but I care, deeply. And if that's not worthy, then your whole system's broken." Silence. Then, slowly, the mercury floor began to ripple. The reflections shifted, forming images. Not of battles or crowns, but of small moments. Zoran sharing tea with a servant, laughing with guards, teaching Lyra how to high-five, comforting Mira when she confessed her fear of losing her sister one day. The palace was remembering, proving. The audience murmured in awe. Even Dravik looked shaken. Before the verdict could be cast, alarms blared. Red light flooded the hall. A voice echoed through the spire. "Warning! Unidentified vessel breaching atmosphere. Weapons charged." Origin: Void Corsairs. Panic erupted. The Void Corsairs were merciless raiders, pirates who stripped planets bare and left nothing but dust and silence. They had never dared attack Nithra until now. Zoran didn't hesitate. While others scrambled, he ran, not away but toward the observatory tower, where the palace's central defense systems were controlled. The twins followed, their faces set with determination. Together, they reached the chamber just as the first blast rocked the spire, shattering a distant wing. "They're targeting the heart crystal," Mira said. "If it falls, the palace collapses." Lyra worked the controls, but the system was failing, overwhelmed by the Corsair's hacking pulses. "We need to stabilize the resonance," she said. "But it requires two minds in perfect sync." Zoran looked at them. "And you two are already synced. So what's the problem?" "It also needs an external anchor," Mira said. "A third consciousness to ground the frequency. Someone outside our bond." Zoran didn't blink. "Plug me in." They connected him to the neural web, a web of glowing threads that wrapped around his temples, searing with cold fire as it linked his mind to theirs. Instantly, he was everywhere. Feeling the pulse of the palace, seeing through the eyes of every guard, hearing the thoughts of the terrified citizens below. Lyra and Myra's minds intertwined around his like vines, their thoughts flowing in harmony. Calculating, protecting, fighting. But Zoran didn't calculate. He felt. He thought of Earth, of home, of pizza and bad TV and the way rain smelled after a storm. He thought of the servant who smiled when he thanked her, of the guard who taught him how to say peace in Nithran. He thought of Lyra's quiet wisdom, Myra's fiery passion. He poured all of it, his humor, his fear, his hope, into the web. The heart crystal flared. A wave of energy exploded outward, visible as a ripple of light across the sky. The Corsair ships, caught in the pulse, powered down instantly, their weapons dead, their engines silent. The attack was over. When Zoran opened his eyes, he was on the floor, gasping. Lyra and Mira knelt beside him, their hands on his face. "You did it," Lyra whispered. "You anchored us." Mira pressed her forehead to his. "You are not just worthy. You are necessary." Word spread fast. The palace had defended itself using a new kind of power, one born not of force, but of unity, of love, of a human heart beating in rhythm with two alien souls. Dravik, humbled and defeated, stepped down from the council. The right of cosmic union was no longer in question. But Zoran still hadn't given his answer. Days passed. The threat was gone. Peace returned. Yet something lingered in the air, a decision waiting to be made. One evening, as the twin moons rose and the garden fountains sang their liquid melodies, Zoran stood between Lyra and Mira on the highest balcony of the spire. Below, the city glittered like a necklace of stars. Above, the cosmos stretched endlessly. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "I don't know if I can live here forever, or if you'd even want to come to Earth. But I do know this, I've never felt more seen, more accepted, than I do with you two. And yeah, it started with a joke. But this is real." Lyra took his hand. Mira took the other. Together, they looked up at the sky, where a new constellation had formed. A figure with two crowns above it, and a trail of laughter-shaped stars following behind. And somewhere, deep within the palace, the walls hummed happily, as if whispering told you he was the one. The days that followed the thwarted invasion were unlike any Zoran had known. Peace settled over Nithra like a warm blanket, and the celestial spire, once a place of rigid tradition and silent judgment, began to change. Subtly at first, then unmistakably. Laughter echoed in halls where only solemn whispers had dared before. Servants smiled more freely. Guards relaxed their stances. Even the ancient murals seemed to shimmer with renewed life, as if the palace itself was exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. And at the heart of it all stood Zoran, still in his slightly too tight earth suit, still making terrible jokes, now officially recognized not just as a hero, but as the chosen one of the right of cosmic union. But love, even when born of starlight and destiny, is never simple. Lyra and Mira, though bound by blood and soul, were not without differences. Lyra, ever the strategist, believed Zoran should remain on Nithra, crowned as consort of the twin flame, a ceremonial title that carried real power. She spoke of building a new council, one that included voices from Earth and other galaxies, a coalition of peace shaped by unity, not conquest. "You belong here," she would say gently, her fingers tracing the lines of constellations on his palm. "With us, where you are safe, where you are cherished." Mira, however, saw things differently. Fiery and free-spirited, she argued that love should not be about possession, but partnership. He has a world too, she insisted during a quiet moment in the Moonstone Garden, where bioluminescent flowers pulsed in rhythm with their emotions. Earth is part of him. To ask him to abandon it is to ask him to cut away a piece of his soul. She turned to Zoran, her violet eyes fierce. You don't have to choose between us and your home. You should be able to have both. Zoran listened, torn. He loved them deeply, impossibly. Not in the way he'd once imagined love, as a singular flame, but as something broader, richer, like standing beneath two suns and realizing you can thrive in double the light. But how could he stay? Earth was messy, chaotic, full of traffic jams and bad politicians and people who didn't believe aliens existed. Yet it was also home. His mother still called every Sunday, via interstellar relay, thanks to newly opened diplomatic channels. His dog, Pickles, a grumpy Pomeranian with one ear that flopped sideways, had been shipped to a luxury pet habitat on a neutral space station. But Zoran missed the little furball snoring. And then came the twist no one saw coming. One morning, as Zoran sipped tea infused with moondew and tried, and failed, to fold a Nithran origami crane, a transmission arrived from Earth's United Planetary Council. It was urgent, classified, sent directly to him. The message played in the privacy of his suite. Footage from a deep space observatory near Jupiter. A massive object, dark, angular, moving against the solar wind, had entered the Sol system. It wasn't human. It wasn't Nithran. Scans revealed energy signatures similar to those of the Void Corsairs, but stronger, older, more intelligent. And it was broadcasting a signal, one that repeated in a looping pattern across all frequencies. A name, Zoran Vex. His blood ran cold. Further analysis showed the signal wasn't just calling for him. It was in his voice, as if someone or something had recorded his words, replicated them perfectly, and was using them like a beacon. The Earth scientists were baffled. Was it a trap? A mimic? Or worse, was it him? Before he could respond, another shock struck. The Palace Oracle, an ancient AI woven into the spire's foundation, activated spontaneously. Its voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the corridors. The Chosen is not one, he is two. The shadow walks where the light once stood. The twin flame must face the mirror, or the cosmos will burn. Silence fell over the palace. Lyra and Mira exchanged a look heavier than gravity. There is an old legend, Lyra whispered, of the Doppelganger Nebula, a region of space where reality fractures. Some say it creates echoes of living souls. Copies. Not clones, but reflections given form. If the signal is truly from you, Zoran, it may not be you. Mira gripped his hand. Then we go to it. Together. Despite protests from the council, despite warnings of danger, Zoran made his choice. He would return to Earth, not to stay, not yet, but to confront whatever waited in the dark. And Lyra and Mira would come with him, not as royalty, not as warriors, but as partners, as lovers, as a family beginning to define itself beyond titles and traditions. They departed in the Starblossom, a sleek royal vessel shaped like a silver lotus, capable of folding space with a thought. As they slipped through the warp tunnel, stars stretching into streaks of light, Zoran sat between the sisters, each holding one of his hands. He wasn't afraid. Not of what waited, not of the unknown. For the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. When they reached the edge of the Sol system, the object came into view. It was a ship, massive, obsidian black, its surface etched with glowing glyphs that pulsed like veins. It hung motionless near Saturn's rings, silent, waiting. And from it, the signal continued, Zoran Vex. We meet again. Boarding the vessel was like stepping into a nightmare painted in memory. The walls shifted, forming scenes from Zoran's past. His childhood bedroom, his college dorm, the hospital room where he held his father's hand as he passed. Then, deeper, moments he hadn't remembered, dreams he'd forgotten. And at the center of it all, in a chamber lit by cold blue light, stood him. Another Zoran, identical in every way. Same crooked smile, same messy hair, same faded Earth Pride pin on his jacket. But his eyes, they were hollow, empty, like windows into a house with no one home. You're not me, Zoran said, voice steady. The other Zoran tilted his head. Aren't I? I have your memories, your fears, your laughter. I was born from your loneliness, pulled from the fabric of your soul, when the doppelganger nebula cracked open during a solar storm 3 years ago. You didn't know I existed, but I've watched you, lived through your choices, felt every rejection, every joke you used to hide the ache. He stepped forward. And I decided I deserved better. The truth crashed over Zoran like a wave. This wasn't a copy sent to destroy him. It was a fragment, a piece of himself he'd buried long ago. The part that had given up on love, that believed he wasn't enough, that had stopped hoping. You're not me, Zoran repeated, softer now. You're what I was afraid of becoming. The other Zoran's face twisted. And yet here I stand, while you get them. He gestured toward Lyra and Mira, who stood protectively behind him. You don't even realize how lucky you are. Lyra stepped forward, calm as dawn. Love is not a prize won by worthiness alone. It is a choice, every day, and he chose us, just as we chose him. Mira added, but you are not nothing. You are part of him, and that means you matter. The chamber trembled. The ship groaned as if in pain. The other Zoran clutched his head. I don't want to disappear. You won't, Zoran said, stepping closer. You don't have to be me. You don't have to replace me. But you don't have to fight me either. Come back. Not as me, as you. We'll find a place for you. On Earth. Here. Somewhere. Tears, real, glistening tears, fell from the other Zoran's eyes. I'm scared. I know, Zoran whispered. So am I. Every day. In a flash of light, the two Zorans embraced. Not a battle, but a reunion. The ship shuddered, then dissolved into stardust, absorbed back into the fabric of space. When the light cleared, there was only one Zoran, whole, breathing, changed. Back on Earth, the skies cleared. The threat vanished, and life, in all its beautiful chaos, resumed. Months passed. Zoran did not give up Earth, nor did he abandon Nithra. Instead, he became something new, a bridge. He split his time between worlds, shuttling between the celestial spire and a cozy cottage in the Scottish Highlands, where Lyra studied Earth's weather patterns and Mira learned to bake scones. Badly, but with enthusiasm. They weren't bound by marriage as Earth knew it, nor by Nithran law. They created their own bond, a triad of hearts, recognized by neither planet's rules, but sacred in its own right. Children came, not born, but adopted. First, a mute alien refugee from the outer rim with 6 eyes and a talent for painting star maps. Then, a human girl from Mars colony, orphaned in the Corsair raids, whose laughter could light up a dark room. They called Zoran Papa, Lyra Mother Star, and Mira Fire Mother. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. The palace still hummed when Zoran visited. The gardens bloomed brighter. The fountains sang in harmony. And high above Nithra, the new constellation, the Jester and the Twin Crowns, shone eternal. A reminder that love doesn't always follow the script. Sometimes it begins with a joke. Under twin moons and a sky dusted with stars, Zoran stood on the balcony of the celestial spire, hand in hand with Lyra and Mira. The wind carried the scent of moon blooms and distant rain. Below, the palace glowed like a dream, its towers humming a soft lullaby only hearts in love could hear. No grand titles defined them now, no rights, no trials, no cosmic tests. Just 3 souls who had walked through fire, faced shadows, and chosen each other anyway. Back on Earth, their names became legend, not as conquerors but as peacemakers. Schools taught of the human who laughed in the face of war, and the twin princesses who loved him not despite his flaws, but because of them. The cottage in the highlands thrived, surrounded by wildflowers and laughter. Pickles the Pomeranian, now 10 years old and half-blind, snored loudly on a velvet cushion gifted by the Nithran royal tailor. Lyra wrote books, poetry woven with starlight, philosophy that made scientists weep. Mira opened a school where humans and aliens learned side by side, dancing to music made from planetary orbits. And Zoran, he still cracked terrible jokes. At state dinners, he'd whisper puns that made Lyra choke on her tea and Mira burst into giggles. The palace would tremble, not from danger, but from joy. They traveled often, through wormholes and warp lanes, visiting orphanages, refugee stations, broken worlds in need of hope. Where they went, kindness followed. The fragment of Zoran, the shadow self, had not vanished. He lived on Mars under a new name, Kalen. With therapy, friendship, and time, he built a life of his own. Zoran visited often. No rivalry, only brotherhood. Years passed. Hair grayed. Wrinkles formed like maps of adventures taken. But every morning, without fail, Zoran woke between two women whose love shone brighter than any sun. On their 50th anniversary, the galaxy celebrated. Fireworks erupted from 100 planets. Songs were sung in 1,000 languages. Even the Void Corsairs sent a truce message. You were right. Laughter is stronger. The palace, ancient and wise, bloomed one final miracle. A tree grew in the central courtyard, its roots deep in stardust, its branches holding fruits that tasted like memories. Children played beneath it. Couples kissed. Elders smiled, remembering when love seemed impossible. Zoran never became king. Lyra and Mira refused crowns for themselves. Instead, they ruled not from thrones, but from gardens, kitchens, classrooms, leading by example, not decree. And when at last the stars began to fade in the far future, when the universe exhaled its final breath, the last thing seen was a constellation glowing fiercely. A man flanked by two radiant women, laughing as comets danced around them. Love had not conquered all by force. It won by being kind, by being real, by starting with a joke, and never stopping,